Thank you so much. It is great to be here with you. I'll turn my video on just for a little bit to say hi to you all. It is good to be with you today. And I am up in Seattle, Washington, so about as far as from Florida as you can get and still be in the US. But as Vicki said, I have been really on all aspects of grant work. So I've been the person that writes the grants, the person that reviews the grants, the person that is the funder. Often I'm the person that is hired to do the grant work as well. So I really do like library grant work, and I'm glad to be with you all today to talk to you about it. So our learning objectives for today, what we'll be going over is we're really going to go through the whole process of grant work. So all of the steps that are involved. I always have a hard time because I just want to tell you everything. So I will go kind of fast through some of the slides, but you can always go back later and watch again if you want to get more details. And we will talk about how to develop grant projects and to really use community needs and planning as the basis for those. We will talk about who gives the funding to libraries, so where to find those sources, and also talking about how to write that proposal that funders will want to give to, that they will be will love to get you involved. And then hopefully you will also be really excited and confident about grant work by the end of this webinar as well. So I would love to know how many of you are new to grant work. If you can use that chat and tell me, like, have you never written a grant before? Or have you written maybe 1 to 5 grants, or 6 to 10 grants, or more than 10? Or you could be like me and I've totally lost count. Okay, great. Never written one, never written one, never. One, first one in July, never. Two very basic ones, and never. Great. I love that because I do get so excited about grant work, and am really excited that you're new to grant work, because I think I can share some good tips with you to get you started. And there is a lot of funding out there, so definitely great to have you all here. Oh, and Lauren said 1 to 5, great. Okay, good. Well, if you do have experience, definitely feel free to chime in at any time using that chat if you have tips to share. The good news is, even if you are brand new to grant work, you do have a lot of great experience just being in the library world that you can definitely rely on. So one thing we do in libraries is we're good at finding information, right? And that's really important for grant work, because you do need to find out about funders, find out where those grants are. You do need to find out about your community and find out what their needs are, and track down information even about your own library and your community. So definitely finding information, thinking about it as reference work as well. So answering questions. And if you think about it, a grant proposal is really a lot of questions that you're answering. So kind of that advanced reference work. And then there's a lot of writing and editing, which sometimes we are involved with library work, or there's at least probably somebody at your library who has these skills. And then serving the community, and that's really the biggest part of grant work, and something that of course we do in all of our institutions. And when I talk about community in this webinar, I know you are from different types of libraries, so it's just whatever community that you serve. So if you're at a public library serving the families that live around you, or if you're at an academic institution serving students and faculty and staff. Special libraries too. And then building relationships. This is a really important part of grant work, and again, something that we're really good at in the library world. The other great thing is that libraries have really great reputations, and this helps us a lot in grant work. So the reason I have this little chick up there is because libraries do, for most people, give them kind of the warm fuzzies, right? So they have past experiences with libraries, maybe going to story time when they were little, but they really believe, rightfully so, that we're trustworthy institutions, right? So when you think about grant funders, they want to give money to an institution that they know is going to carry out the work that they've said, and they figure, well, a librarian's not going to run off to Jamaica with the money. They're going to do what they say they're going to do. And also thinking that sometimes you're competing against nonprofits for the grant funding, and sometimes those are new new organizations that are really having to establish themselves, and they have to prove their reputation. So although people may not always understand everything we do in our libraries these days, they do really trust us. So that's a really good benefit. So if I could have you learn one thing from this whole webinar, it's this: that it's really all about the people, not about the money and not about the stuff. So sometimes with grant work, people think about, oh, I need to get something, right? I remember my first book, the publisher wanted to put a big, piles of cash on the cover or something like that. And I was like, no, 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 it's not about the money. And the reason that we want to really focus on the people is because that's what funders are interested in, right? So they want to help people. That's why they're giving money. They're not giving money away just, because they want to give out stuff. They're giving money away because they want to help people. And then you're the institution that's going to carry out that work for them. So we'll talk more about this as we go along. So grant work is really about meeting the needs of the community served, and we'll talk more about what that means as well. So this is the grant process cycle that is used in my book, and we're just going to go through each step in this cycle through the webinar to date. So we'll go through all these different steps. And the first one is really planning for success. So starting off, and really that, I like to, especially in these times, give as many shortcuts as I can for your library grant work. And one thing is really use what you have already. So when you're planning, when you're getting started with grant work, see what's out there and already available. If you do have a strategic plan for your library, that is an amazing shortcut for grant work, because that will already have things that you'll need, like goals and objectives, and hopefully there's maybe some needs assessments that's already been done as part of a strategic plan that you can use as well. But it is really a great thing to rely on. So definitely gather that. If your library doesn't have a plan, or even if it does, also think about community plans. So whatever town you're in, whatever city you're in, will have a plan. Counties have plans. All of those community organizations will have plans as well. And those can be really great to look at, because if you're carrying out that work of their plans, that's a wonderful thing to be able to then tell them when you're looking for local support and funding, right? If you can show, oh, well, we're helping support these local community plans as well. And like I said, there might be needs assessments that are done as part of your library strategic plan. But if there's not, also looking out into your community. So again, maybe a government institution has done needs assessments, but it also might be larger nonprofits in your area. They might have carried out needs assessments as well. So that might be something to look at. So I love this quote: you can do anything but not everything. And I think in the library world, and sometimes in the grant world, this is a good reminder, because we kind of try to meet the needs of everyone all the time. But really trying to think of how can you narrow down and think about, when you're thinking about grant work and a grant project, what can you do to focus on some real big needs in your community? And this can be a really great thing to do because we all have limited resources. So this really will allow you to think about, can you do a few things really well instead of trying to spread out and meet too many different things going on at once. So focusing on community needs is kind of a great way to be able to do this. And just community needs, what I mean by that is really thinking about what are the big things going on for your community members. So personally in their lives, what is keeping them up at night? Definitely in 2020, this is kind of apparent in a lot of our communities. But thinking about, you know, if you have a community with young parents, it's going to be very different than if you have empty nesters, right? Really trying to think about who is in your community and trying to find out what it is that are the biggest needs that you could help meet. So I have a little exercise for you. So you're going to use the chat again. So tell me if you can read what I'm about to put up on the screen. All right, can you read that? Let me know on the chat. All right. Kind of crazy, huh? How our brain can work. Okay, here's an even harder one. Let's see if you can read this one. I throw some numbers in there too. Pretty amazing, right? And the reason for this is that our experience really kind of fills things in for us. So our brain does this for us automatically. So if there's things that we're not sure about, our brain kind of will fill it in. And why this is important with needs assessments and thinking about our community needs is that often we think we know our community, but we might just know the people that we're familiar with, the people that are coming into the library. We might not know about other groups that aren't coming into the library, or we might not know about everything that about those people, right? We might jump to some assumptions if we just try to think on our own about what are their big needs. So here are some examples of how you would write up some community needs. I've got two examples for you. But this first one, this was a library that just had a lot of older adults that were coming into the library and asking about for health information, right? So maybe they had a new diagnosis or they had a new medication that was given to them, but they just kept coming into the library and asking questions, and it was taking a lot of staff time to meet that need. So sometimes you can find out what that need is just by thinking about what are people coming in and asking about a lot, right? That can be an easy way to come up with it. Or maybe it's around students needing research skills, right? So this was a library with middle school students that didn't have after school programs and the state budget was cut, and they were really needing instruction and information literacy and research skills. And today with our school situations, this might definitely be true as well. So there are a lot of different ways that you can find out what community needs are. Um, so one great way is just by having community conversations, and there's a lot of free tools for how to do this. And this doesn't have to be anything huge. It can be kind of, you know, bigger like a town hall, but it can also just be some smaller focus groups. But there are some great tools that have come out in the last few years that really just step you through everything that you need to do. I mean, even as far as here's the invitation to send out by email, you know, this is how to set up the room, this is how to deal with different situations, different things people might say, these are questions you can use. So definitely take a look at those. This is a new one that actually came out just this last February for smaller libraries, from Libraries Transforming Communities, which is an ALA initiative. And they've got a 30-page guide that really goes through everything that you need. And there's even a free online course that they have as well. I think really the easiest way, if you're looking for a shortcut with finding out community needs, is to do a few interviews with some key leaders in your community. So whatever community you're serving. So thinking about who in your community really reaches a lot of different people, or the people that you're interested in serving through a grant project. So it might be religious leaders, or it might be school leaders, or it might be social workers. Just, really a phone conversation, or getting together, with your masks on and talking for a few minutes, I think can really get you a lot of information. And when you do this, it's really important to ask them about what they're seeing and what the people they're serving are asking for. So don't go into it saying, what can the library do to help? Just because people, they do not understand everything that we do. So they might think, oh, they're asking for book recommendations, or something. They'll think more narrowly about what we do in our library. So they might not think about the fact that we provide job support, or education, or training, or technology support. So really coming to them and saying, what is it that you're seeing, and what are people asking for? And definitely in the chat, if you've done anything around community needs, feel free to share that. And then we'll move on to our next phase, design the winning grant projects. So once you've figured out what those needs are with the people in your community, then really your grant project is just your answer to those needs, how you're going to help address those needs. And of course, not every need is something that the library wants to tackle. So you need to prioritize and figure out what things that you do want to help solve, of course. In your grant project, this can be anything that you're seeking money for. And so it can be for equipment, or for a building or capital project. They even have grants for planning a project, and then for implementing the project as separate grants. Or it could be for research or resources, lots of grants for programs and services. Usually there's not many for operating expenses, but with COVID, there are a lot more of those available as well. I do want to tell you, as you're in these planning phases, to really dream big. And what I mean by that is, I know I was working with one librarian, and she was trying to think of ideas for a grant project, and she just kept thinking so small. And she was thinking about, some decorations they needed or something like that. And I think instead, really think about those community needs. Think about what would you like to see really change in a year? What would you like to see differently? And of course, hopefully through this, you're involving other people to help brainstorm some of these ideas as well. But even thinking about it, if a genie came and gave you 3 wishes, what would they be for? Really thinking big that way. And I'll never forget, I had 2 librarians that I was working with, and they were from 2 different counties. They were county librarians. And they both had kind of dire situations with their library buildings. And one just really had this kind of bad attitude, where she was like, she didn't want to start doing grant work. She was like, I'm just trying to keep the doors open, and I can't do any programming because I have a leaky roof, and all of these things. And then there was another librarian at a neighboring county, and she was like, we have a small library, and we have those same problems. you know, not enough space, but I'm going to try to make this work, and I'm just going to do what I can do right now. So we are going to look for grants for programs, and I'm just going to hold the programs outside the library right now because we don't have the space either, but I'm going to have some outdoor programs, or I'm going to partner with the senior center and have my programming there. And so both of them really, I tracked them, and you know, the one was still kind of trying to just get the basics fixed, and appealing, you know, to her local city, while the other one just really went ahead and got started and started doing things. And definitely her county really viewed the library more favorably because they could see what they were doing, right? And they were like, oh, you're doing these really successful programs, you definitely need more space to be able to hold this programming. The other thing is that you might find this is the library grant fairy. So she might come to visit you as part of doing your grant work. And I know this sounds kind of silly, but what I mean by this is something I definitely see in grant work so much in libraries, is that once they start doing this active planning and putting out there what they want, the funding just seems to kind of appear. And definitely share in the chat if you've had any of these experiences where additional money seems to kind of just show up. So I have a couple of examples that I'll share. One is I worked in the state library in Arizona, and there was a librarian there who she was on an airplane and she got upgraded to first class. And the man next to her started talking to her and asking her what she did for a living, and she said she was a librarian. And he said, oh, you must read a lot of books then. And she was like, well, yeah, but you know, that's not really what I do as part of my job. And she was actually working on a grant proposal on the airplane, and so she showed it to him and showed him what she was doing. And she said in her community, they were in a resort town that had a lot of migrant workers, and she said they weren't coming into the library, and she really wanted to do outreach and provide some more services to Spanish-speaking people and do that kind of thing. And he was really intrigued by it, and he said, you know what, I actually own a vacation home in your community, and I've never been to the library, and I'll be honest, you know, I'm probably never going to go to the library. I went to the library when I was a kid and I loved it, and now I get all my books through Amazon. But I really support what you're trying to do, and I think that's really important. And he actually got his checkbook out and wrote her a check to help support the project. And that's what I mean by that library funding fairy. And not only that, but he said, I'm going to challenge my friends who also own a vacation homes there to send you money to support this. And she did get more money in the mail. So that definitely happens. I've had some other stories too of people that have just like let other people know what they're working on. And a lot of times it's really interesting. People don't even understand that we need to write grants for our libraries. They just think that we're funded and, you know, we have all that we need. So definitely just spreading the word and getting it out there, I think, is really important. And even, you know, at the end of the year, sometimes I've had people tell me that they've had people come into the library, local businesses and things, who have wanted to give donations, that they needed to do a tax deductible donation. So really trying to have something in mind for them. I had a small librarian who told me a great story. She did a lot of work in her library on grant work and some creative kind of things as well. She was wanting to have a teen center in her library. She couldn't find grants for a teen center, but she did find one for kind of a community history center. And so instead, she kind of changed things. She added that center and got that grant, but then had the additional space because of that she was able to create a teen room anyway. So sometimes you can be creative that way. But she was making all these changes in her library, and she did have that businessman come in at the end of the year, and he said, you know, what is it that you need? And what she did, I thought, was so great. She said, you know, what I did was I took him into our children's room, which was an area that we hadn't remodeled yet. And she took him, and they had this little TV that was on the floor. And she said, you know, we do a lot of programming in here, and also we have kids that come in after school that sometimes they wait here until their parents pick them up. And so sometimes we just put them down here and have them watch a show. And she said, we're also wanting to do family movie night so that we can have everybody come in and watch a movie and eat popcorn and that kind of thing. She said, so what we really need is we need a big screen TV. She said, if you could give us something like that, we could put a plaque on it with your name, but that would be really helpful for us. So I love this example because it really shows how she made it about the people and not the stuff, right? If he had come in and she just said, yeah, we need a new TV. We really need a big screen TV. You know, he might have thought, what do they need a big screen TV for? You know, is it the staff wanting to watch soap operas on their breaks, or, you know, what does the library need a TV for? But instead, she was able to really take them in and really show them, you know, what it was like, that, you know, she had all these little kids in there that were crowded around this old little TV on the floor. And so that TV did show up in a few days. So I think that definitely is true. So if you haven't seen that Funding Fairy lately, then she might be headed your way, but it definitely is true once you start doing that grant work and getting that ball rolling, that it definitely seems that starts happening. So I realize that it's great to dream big, but we also have reality, right? So I feel like grant work is kind of this intersection of dreams and reality. So you do have to be careful and think about what you're capable of, and you know what's realistic as well for you to be involved with. Grants are definitely great when you're thinking about doing outreach to underserved library groups, so keep that in mind. Think about people that maybe aren't coming into your library. Another great thing with grant work is definitely developing library partnerships. So share in the chat if you have any of these partnerships already or others that you have. But this can be really useful, again, just when you're trying to think of what those needs are, trying to think up grant project ideas. But also, a lot of funders will actually require that you have a partner involved. So that can be really important as well. So thinking about that, you can partner even with other types of libraries, which can be really helpful. You know, because they might qualify for grants that you don't qualify for, or thinking about community service organizations. You know, all of those groups, they are formed to help communities, right? To help the people in their communities. And they often have funding available as well. So when you develop partners with them, that can be a really good boon. And they might know about grant opportunities. And even thinking about partnering with the media, especially in these times, they are looking for good news to share, and we often have a lot of that with our work. So making good partners out of them. And then even other cultural organizations, so thinking about museums or historical society, they can be great partners with library grant work. And again, they might qualify for grants that you might not, that you can partner with. Okay, in the chat, Anne shared they're trying to develop a partnership with the local high school. Oh, that is great. They have teens that come and wait for a ride home after school. Great idea, yeah. And sometimes we don't think about that, but really having partnerships with other libraries that are close to us can be really beneficial. And again, with grant work, that can really help extend when you're thinking about what grant opportunities that you might have available to you. But funders love that because they also know that if there's more organizations involved, there's a more likelihood of success and of you know, reaching more people as well. Also, feel free to add in the chat if you have questions at any time as well. Okay, so thinking more about making sure your project is helping people. So this is just being about the things, right? The library needs computers. I hear that all the time, right? But instead trying to make it about the people. So thinking about what would the people be using the computers for? So thinking about community members that are unemployed, they need those job seeking skills. So, of course, in our libraries, we are helping people that are unemployed just by even providing those computers, right? They're needing them to look up where the jobs are, to write resumes, to apply for the jobs, all of those things. Maybe it's those students that need the technology to complete their homework, or seniors looking up those health information needs. Or maybe it's everybody got an e-reader for Christmas or whatever the latest gadget is. I'm always amazed when they bring those into the library and they're wanting help with them. But I think that is a great resource that we can be as well. So again, you see the difference of making this about focused on the people and not just about the stuff that's needed. So when you're designing the winning grant project, it's a little bit of all of these things. So the strategic plans and the needs assessments, all of those, community engagement in some type. So whether you're reaching out to community leaders or using volunteers to help. And then there's really a part that's just creative brainstorming. And I think that's kind of the fun part, right? So when you're thinking about how can you meet these needs, what are the ideas that you have for making it happen? And then the final part is really project planning. So just like you would plan any kind of project. So if you're planning summer reading or you're planning, back to school, um, just like any kind of project that you might be planning, even if it's an event or you've planned your wedding or whatever it may be, those same steps are involved. So setting goals and objectives and figuring out a timeline, all of those things are involved as well, figuring out what your budget is. Another important part with project planning that often is required in grant work is outcome-based evaluation. And I'll just very briefly touch on this because I've gone to day-long workshops on outcome-based evaluation, but it is something that you might come across when funders are wanting you to evaluate what the success has been of the project or what the impact has been on the people that have been served. So really it comes down to just trying to figure out what changes have been made for the people that your grant was serving. And so these can be in any of these areas, behavior, attitude, skills, knowledge, or condition or state. So I'll give you a couple of examples of how this could be. So one thing is that traditionally sometimes we just measure success kind of the easy way, just by measuring counts, right? So how many people came into the library, or how many library cards we had, or let's use this webinar as an example. It could be how many people attend or how many people watch the recording, any of those kind of things, how many people register, right? But instead trying to get at, well, did we make a difference? Right? So maybe after this webinar, your behavior is going to change. Maybe you never would have applied for a grant before, but now you're going to apply for one. Or maybe your attitude has changed. Maybe you thought grant work was boring, and then you find out, oh no, it's fun and exciting. Or maybe you learn new skills, right? Things that you can apply or knowledge that you might gain. Or maybe your whole condition and state of being is going to change. Maybe you're going to apply for a grant and get it, and then apply for more, and then your boss is going to be so impressed and you're going to get a raise, and it's just going to change your whole life. So that's kind of on the extreme side, but it does happen in our libraries. When you think about the fact that we help people find jobs and change their lives, or we help people learn to read and change their lives. So it is harder to do outcome-based evaluation. Funders do require it a lot of times because they do want to make sure that their money is being used wisely and for a good purpose. So just thinking about that, it's a lot easier to just count how many people came. But to figure this out, we'd have to ask you, right? You would have to tell us if any of these things changed, or we'd have to observe and see that they changed. With outcome-based evaluation, sometimes you need to do like a pre and a post test or survey to find out, if you're working with a specific group, find out where they were at the beginning is really important, knowing where they started, especially when you're changing skills or knowledge, right? How can you tell if they gained that if you don't know what they had when they started? But the important thing with outcome-based evaluation is it really helps you know that you're spending resources on initiatives that are really making a difference, that it is making a change in the people. So I won't go through all of these in the interest of time, but again, you can go back later and see. But these are some examples of, in those same areas, how this might come into play with a grant project, changing people's behavior, knowledge, attitude, or life status. Okay, let's talk a little bit about what makes a good grant project. So share in the chat, what do you think makes a good grant project? And if you're new to grant work, that's fine. Just think about any kind of project planning or things I've mentioned already. See if we can get at least 3 of these in the chat. Okay, make sure that it's not about the stuff. Okay, collaboration and impact. Yes, that is great. Okay, helping people, helping single parents, a clear goal. Very good. Okay, yeah, it's fine if you've never written one, just thinking about projects in general even. Oh, my chat got kind of messed up here. Okay. All right, and a big hint here, outlines, okay, clearly defined goals. There's a hint on the screen here. Okay, innovation. So innovation is definitely one. Funders like something that's like a new or creative idea. Definitely remember meeting those community needs. They like something that could be replicated, so something that you do that another library then could replicate and do. Maximizing resources, having those outcomes or products, something that's going to be created, those change in the people. Having a reasonable budget and a realistic timeline, those are important. You wouldn't believe how many grants I've read, grant proposals I've read where the budgets are just all over the place and you wonder, okay, who really did their research and who didn't? Having those community partners, a lot of you got having clear goals, SMART objectives, if you haven't heard that before. SMART is specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. An evaluation plan, those outcome-based evaluations, and also sustainability. That's something funders like. They like to see that it's going to go on afterwards, right? That it's not going to just end after the funding or after the grant project timeline. So these are some examples of successful grants that have been shared in some of my books, and I'll go over a couple of these. If you've been involved with a grant, a successful grant, definitely share in the chat so that we can get some good ideas of some grant projects. These are some bigger grant projects, but it doesn't have to be really big, definitely. And I'll give some examples of some smaller grants later as well. This one at the top of the screen is one of my favorites. This is from Pima County Public Library in Tucson, Arizona. And this was a grant that they started many years ago. They were trying to get kids to, teens to use their library, and they'd invested a lot into the library, resources and programs, but they still weren't getting teens in the door. So they did some focus groups, and they had a focus group and they asked the teens, what do you need? And the teens said, well, we need help with our homework. And they actually had an online tutor system, and they had homework help in the library. And the teens said, oh, well, we need graphic novels. And they were like, yeah, we have those. And it was like everything the teens were coming up with, the library was already offering. So the librarian said, well, how can we get teens in the library? How can we get them to know about these things? And one of the teens said, well, we could tell our friends. And out of that grew a big grant project. I can't remember how much their first one was for. It seems like it was like a couple $100,000 even. And they did a teen advocate program. So they hired teens to do presentations to their peer groups. So a teen would be paid $100 to go and do a presentation. And so it could be in front of their scout troop or their sports group or a class, any group of teens. And this was so successful. And the teens, they trained the teens, on what to do. The teens got so excited about it. They actually made a video that they would show. And anytime a librarian showed up on the screen, there was this big ding, 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 like magic around the librarian. Not something that we would do ourselves, but really powerful and really the true meaning of advocacy, right? Speaking on behalf of someone else. And this is a project that has been replicated and that is sustained as well. So even years and years later, now their friends of the library took on this project and they're still doing it. They even have a teen sleepover night at the end, and there's some teens that have actually gone to library school after being involved, but has been very successful. And this can be also used in other ways. So just thinking about any kind of group that you're wanting to attract and serve better in your library, that often, having a few people of that age talking to people that they know can be a lot more powerful, right, than us going in and telling them they should use the library. I won't go through all of these. One at the bottom is the school bus. This was an interesting one. They got a grant to turn an old school bus into the learning bus. And this was from a need in their community. They had people that didn't have transportation to get into their library, some kind of rural and remote areas. So in the summertime, they got a grant to come and do programming out in the community. So they would just bring their tables and chairs and everything and drive out and do the library programming right out there in the community. And I love that idea. So like I said, you can get really creative when you're thinking about grant ideas, which I think is a great thing to do. And definitely, if you have any questions in the chat, feel free to share. But otherwise, we'll move on to the next step in the cycle, researching funders and grant opportunities. So you do have a handout that Vicki already sent out in email with all of this information. So don't worry about it. There's a lot, and I'm going to go through it kind of quickly just so that you have an overview. But like I said, you can always go back later. So first of all, this is a picture of my daughter, who's now 13 and taller than me. But this is when she was, I think, about 2.5 or 3. And it was when we were living in Arizona. And it's dry desert there, and they have these fake pumpkin patches where they just kind of spread the pumpkins out, and you ride on a tractor truck out to find your pumpkin. And we got off the tractor, and she said, oh, look at all the pumpkins. Can I have any one I want? And look, she's so adorable. I was like, oh, of course. pick which one you want. And then I looked, and there were some gigantic ones. And of course, they're really expensive out in the desert, and they charge by the pound. So I was a little worried. But she wandered around, and she finally found this one. And she picked it up, and she said, I want this one. I can carry it. It's just my size. So share in the chat if you know why I'm telling this story in regards to grant work. What do you think? Why is this important to think about for grant work? Know what will work for you and your community. Good. Yeah, definitely. And yeah, request what you can use. Okay, good. Yeah. Nice. Yeah. I think just thinking about also, yeah, requesting what you can use and what's going to work for your community, and not taking too much on, right? So not being attracted to that big ginormic pumpkin that you can't carry. When you go out there looking for grants, you might see those $1 million grants. I've been a grant reviewer for $1 million grants, and sometimes the organization, you're like, oh, they can't carry this grant off, right? It's too much. So sometimes starting small is really the right thing to do. And definitely if you're starting off with grant work, I would suggest looking for some smaller grants. There are some that are, for $1,000 or a couple thousand. And sometimes what's really interesting when you're doing your planning and figuring out your grant project ahead of time before you look for the grants, you'll find that sometimes what you want doesn't cost as much as you might think. I've had that a lot of times with librarians that are like, I really thought this would be an expensive project, but once I partnered and got donations and things, it ended up I didn't need as much as I thought. Okay, so there's two main categories of grant funders. So there's government grants and private grants. So for government, federal, state, and local level grants. So all federal grants are on grants.gov, one website. So that makes it kind of easy, but it also makes it hard because it's overwhelming. There are so many grants available. So one thing that I like to do is to think about what federal grant sources give to libraries the most. So this is a list of the top six federal grant sources. And one thing that I like to do sometimes is you can go to grants.gov and search just based on the agency, but I also like to just go to their websites. So go to the IMLS website. They are the largest funder of libraries, and all of these organizations will have a link to their grant programs, and looking at it that way can be a lot easier. U.S. Department of Education, National Library of Medicine has a lot of consumer health grants. Some go unfunded because people don't even know about them. HUD grants, the National Endowment for the Arts and the National Endowment for the Humanities have some great grant programs that are good for beginners as well. So definitely take a look at those. And then filtering down state and local government sources. So these can be really beneficial because then you're not competing against the whole country, right? You're just within your state. State humanities councils traditionally are very helpful for getting grants. They'll help you if you're a new grant writer. When I worked in state libraries and we gave grants, we were set up a little differently than you all are in Florida. We don't have systems. And so we give a lot of grants to libraries. And definitely if somebody emailed me ahead of the deadline, I would even, read over their proposal and give them tips. That was really part of my job. So there are people in these organizations that are willing to help as well. And then just thinking on a smaller level, your city and your county government also has grant funding available, and again, a lot less competitive. in all of these different areas. So if you pinpoint what it is that you want to focus on, then think about reaching out to those local agencies and talking to them and getting to know them, letting them know that you're, doing a project around historical preservation or technology or whatever it may be, and they might know of funding that's available. Okay, I'm going to speed up a little bit here. Private funding sources. So these are some that you might traditionally think of: foundations, corporations, clubs and organizations, and also our professional associations. So there's a great website, candid.org, and this is a newer website that actually merged and came into being, I think, just earlier this year. Foundation Center and GuideStar were two individual organizations that merged, and they are a nonprofit. They have a lot of funding available, and not funding available, sorry. They have a lot of resources available for finding funding. One thing that they have is a whole tool for visualizing funding for libraries, where you can go in and look and see funding for libraries. They also have developed just this year a link that I've got there for Candid for their coronavirus grants. So there's been, as of yesterday, $14.2 billion in grants to help support organizations right now. And I looked yesterday, you can drill down and you can select Florida and you can type in libraries, library, and find grants that are available. A lot of times on the county level, those are where those are available. So definitely take a look and see what's available there. Grantsmanship Center is another nonprofit. Well, actually, they're not a nonprofit, but they have a lot of free resources for finding grant funding. One of the things that they do, they have this website with the top giving foundations that can be really useful to look at and see, and community foundations and corporate giving programs. So take a look at those sources. Also, community foundations are really important. So those are throughout Florida, and they're wonderful because they really know about local funding. So community foundations will have funding that's available. Sometimes it's something like, there's a family who wants to give, a large contribution, but they want to designate it. Maybe they just want to help children in the community. They don't want to set up their whole own foundation. So they can give to a community foundation and kind of tag it, and then they'll help with that. So definitely reach out to them. They also help a lot with training, and they might have classes available on grant work as well. Great resources. So here's an example of a corporate grant. So, oh, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. This is an example of a small foundation grant, the Ezra Jack Keats Foundation. And I wanted to show you an example of their mini grants because they give these every year and they're really easy to fill out. So you can see what their grant application is, and theirs is just online, and just you can see the tabs up at the top, real easy to fill in. Contact information, information about your organization, your program, the name. You see it's limited to 200 words each on describing the program, the budget, and then you agree and submit. So some applications are really this easy to do. You don't need a lot to do it, but the funding, of course, is smaller as well. So some of those big government grants, the $1 million grants, they'll be hundreds of pages long and can take you months to do. So again, trying to weigh that and starting small, again, great idea. Corporate grant resources, definitely think about just who's in your area. If you have any big box stores next in your area, Best Buy, Target, all of those give grants, and they have to give them locally as well. So great to look at those. Dollar General has some great grant opportunities as well. They're about to open up. There's, I think, in a few months for the next year. A lot of these organizations give funding every year. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Also think about, with these funders, you know, they're real people and they're not ATMs with money coming out of their ears. They're people like you and I. So you can call organizations and talk to them as well. And then thinking about our professional organizations. So whatever library type that you're in, definitely lots of grants from ALA and PLA available, and all of those local service clubs, thinking about those. A great shortcut that I maintain is a library grants blog. So this is a free website you can go to, and I post things that are more national grants that are available, but they're all available to libraries. Here's an example of one that I just posted, a new ALA grant for libraries transforming communities, focusing on small and rural libraries. So if you're at a smaller library, they're giving $3,000 grants to have a community conversation. So this could be a great grant if you're getting started in grant work as well. And they're giving to over 650 libraries. So really good chances there as well. So let's start wrapping up our end of our cycles. So now we're ready to write that winning grant proposal, but you see we're kind of near the end. And the reason that I really advocate for this is if you spend a lot of time doing your planning and your designing and being really thoughtful before you jump into writing the proposal, a lot of that work is going to be done for you, and you're going to have a much more powerful proposal as well. So really important when you're writing the grant proposal to tell the story of those people, right? It's all about the people, and to really, you know, we're passionate about the work that we do when it comes time to write it. Put that in, you know, back it up with the facts. But I know I had one librarian I was working with, and she was having a hard time with this. Like, she just was like, I need to get books to children, and she couldn't get any further than that. And I was like, well, really tell me what the story is, what's going on. And she said, well, we're in a really poor community, and there's not, you know, the kids here, some of them, there's no books in their home at all, and I want to get a grant where I can actually give the books to them, that they can bring them home and write their name in it and start their own library. And so that was a much different story than what she was just thinking of, I need to get books for kids, and more compelling as well. Keeping the audience in mind, so thinking about who that funder is, not using library lingo. They might not know what story time is or gate counts. Getting feedback, don't submit a grant that nobody else has read. Asking for everything you need. So really thinking through what would make your project successful. I remember a bunch of grants that I reviewed for laptop labs, and there was one library that asked for just the laptop lab and another that asked for the laptop lab. They also asked for a charging station, and they asked for funding to hire somebody from the local community college to create curriculum and to teach the public how to use the technology and teach their library staff how to take on those classes. And we gave to both libraries, but you can see one got a lot more. So really trying to think through everything that you need. And then staying positive. You won't get every grant for sure, but even in just writing the grant proposal, staying positive, letting the funder know that you're really going to be able to make this happen. I love grant work because it does put a deadline on things for us. It makes us put things in writing and gives us a deadline. And going into our very last phase here as we're wrapping up, like I said, you won't get every grant, so don't give up. You can ask for comments from reviewers. Sometimes they'll give you those. And sometimes you can revise and edit. You can resubmit to the original funder or find another source. If you are funded, definitely celebrate, thank the funder, get the word out to everyone, and then it's really time to begin that work, right? You might have to update your timeline, hire staff, start that evaluation so you have that good baseline. And as we're wrapping up today, definitely if you have any questions, share in the chat. I have one more story to tell you about. This is the Angel Fire Library in New Mexico. And I first went to visit them. I worked at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation when it very first started, and they were giving first computers to rural areas, and their library was an all-volunteer library that was at the back of the firehouse, one little room. They didn't even have a table to put the computers on. They had a volunteer make one out of an old door. And they really decided, getting that one grant, that they were going to just start getting more grants and work harder on it. And they were going to build a library building. And there was one woman who was retired, and she had never written a grant before, but she decided she was going to write one grant a month for a year and just see how she did. And she got like 8 out of the 10 grants. So I talked to her later when I went to work for the state library there, and she said, you know, it got easier. She went on, she could reuse some of the information. She had people that, you know, told her, go look for this grant after she'd been funded. They did have a library fairy come and donate the land for the building. So this is their library building, and they have paid staff now. So it really is possible to do this work, even if you're just getting started, as many of you are. I wanted to share this quote: you can't go through a single day without having an impact on the world around you. What you're doing is making a difference, and you have to decide what kind of difference that you want to make. And that's what I love about grant work, is it's really, that's what we're doing. We're deciding the difference that we're going to make. And final quote, this is from the founder of Habitat for Humanity: I've tried raising money by asking for it and not asking for it. I always got more by asking for it. And that's kind of what we're doing with grant work, which isn't always something that comes naturally to us, but it's kind of an easier way to do it, I think, with having a grant proposal to fill out. So definitely go out there. There is a lot of funding available, and I wish you a lot of good luck with your grant work. Stay in touch. Let me know how it goes. Here's my email address, stephaniegerding@gmail.com. Let me know how it goes, or if you have any questions. And thank you so much to Vicki and to TBLC for hosting this.